Guys, my name's definitely not Alan Hart. We've binned Alan off today. He's actually, we haven't. He's behind the camera. He's going to be taking some questions as we're doing this live. You might have noticed we've done a couple of these of late over the last month or so. And first of all, we'll start with the reason why. So this, the reason for this video today is it's to do with water regs. Now, we've at the centre, we've started doing air source heat pump training and whatnot over the past sort of month or so. And part of the prerequisite for air source heat pumps and other courses is that you have to have your water regs. Now, we've always done water regs ever since the centre's been open, but what we found is that we never had much of an uptake of it. We had some people coming through, but until fairly recently, when people were it was mandatory for people to do it to then move on to renewables, we started seeing a dramatic increase in the number of people coming through. Now, what's interesting about it is when these guys are sat in the room, they're very much seeing it as a tick box approach to then move on to the renewable side. And I found that really, really strange, to be honest, because the water reg side of it is you know, it's paramount. It's of the utmost importance. And I've tried to explain that to a couple of guys coming through with various responses, which, you know, again, is quite interesting. So one thing that we've tried to do historically as well is try and give more of a more in-depth overview of the various components associated with the water regs. So when we talk about double check valves, RPZ valves, that kind of thing, actually showing you them. So this is Paul Daly. Paul Daly's he's the most knowledgeable person I've ever come across with regards to water regs. I had Paul at the centre a few months back for his Unvented, and I can honestly say I probably learned a lot more that day than what Paul did. He's a member of WEAPS, he's an independent water regs investigator, he's an RPZ tester, he specialises in water regs and inspections, and he advises some really high-end companies, blue chip companies we're talking about, as well as some public sector bodies. For obvious reasons we can't really name them or talk about them. I'm sure some of the stories that Paul's told me about regarding things he's come across on site are fascinating, and I certainly find the time I spent with Paul really interesting to see from a bog standard gas engineer plumber's perspective, the other side of the water regs that you don't really think of when you go into a property or a premises. So yeah, without further ado, Paul, can you tell us a bit more about, you know, how you got into this side of the industry, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, well, I started off in the domestic market in domestic gas, and I then started picking up commercial customers, and I had my water regs. But from a water regs perspective, the actual course doesn't really prepare you for a commercial environment, because the risks are totally different to a domestic property. And probably a good example of that is a domestic washing machine, actually.
Right.
So a domestic washing machine, if the equipment is approved by the regulator, or RAS approved, or Kiwa, or NSF, or one of the approval bodies, then it would only need a single check valve to protect it. But if it's not approved, it would need a double. And the reason being is the double actually protects the hose, so it's a material that's not approved for use for connection directly to the potable water supply. And in fact, these hoses, a lot of them are imported, they actually start to degrade, and you'll then get reports of a taste of TCP, and that's really, really common.
So these were the kind of things that you were seeing out there, and what did that get you thinking about? Well,
yeah, it does get you thinking, you know, that installations are being completed and they're non-compliant, and then one thing leads to another, and your domestic washing machine in a commercial premises could be anything from a fluid category 2 to a fluid category 5.
Yeah.
You know, and fluid category, for example, would be overalls in an engineering workshop.
So oil and contaminants.
Yeah, and we've got things like the additional risks that we have is extra use.
Yeah. So
a couple of people might question, well, I work in an engineering environment and I wash my overalls at home. Well, there's only one pair going in once a day, if they're getting done once a day. But in an engineering environment, you might have 10 pairs going in one load. Definitely. And you might have more than one load going in per day.
Yeah.
And then you've got the healthcare environment. So let's say that this domestic washing machine you then put in a healthcare environment, and it'll go from a fluid category 2 to a 5.
Because you've got blood and feces and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So this was the kind of thing that you were seeing, and what's that just get you thinking, well, hang on, this is a lot more interesting than what I thought, and I'm going to move into that side of it.
I do, yeah, and I do find it interesting, and I like to dig and delve, and I want to know who, why, what, where, when.
So you've been doing this now 20 years?
Yeah.
And so that's just on the, so you're a qualified plumber and gas engineer as well, but then you moved into the sort of specialising in the water reg side 20 years ago, and we've seen the cups as well, that you guys who are looking at this channel, you might follow Captain BackFlow. Well, this is Captain BackFlow. He's like Banksy. I call him the Banksy of the water regulations industry. So you've spoke about a couple of things that got you into the industry and the things you used to see. What would you see from a sort of small commercial premises kind of thing? So a lot of our guys are going to be going into domestic properties where they'll be fitting bib taps outside, and what sort of problems will you come across with that, or what things should they be doing that you find them not doing? And also from a small commercial perspective with regards to hairdressers, barbershops, dog groomers, that kind of thing. What's the thing that you're likely to see out there?
Yeah, so domestic. So in a domestic property, we are looking for things like double check valve on incoming cold water supply.
Yeah.
That's not mandatory, but we would recommend it.
Right.
You know, if you've got a multiple occupancy, then you would want a double check valve. And depending on the water company, depends on whether you want double check valve at point of use as well within the building. So always consult your local water company for additional advice.
That's something you don't see, isn't it? Well, you see it sometimes, but it's very rare you go to isolate a stopcock under the sink if you're doing a job and you see a double check valve there.
Yeah, it's I think part of that is down to it's not mandatory for domestic at point of entry, unless you start moving into multiple occupancy buildings, you know, flats, things like that, which there's loads of flats out there. So it's something that we would just recommend. You're just protecting yourself, and there's a good few reasons for that, because within the property there are a number of risks. So we always look at point of use protection. So things like hose union bib taps, you can buy them with a double check valve built into it. That's actually known as a type H UK1 device. I'm not a fan of them types. I prefer double check valve within the thermal envelope of the building.
They can freeze in the open position.
Yeah, they can freeze in open position. The checks can break, but you can winterize them. So you've got a little jacket. You've got your little drain point between your checks. But realistically, people don't do that. You've then got domestic washing machines. You've got shower hoses on bath shower mixers where the hose reaches into the toilet. We've seen a rapid increase in what we'll call bum guns. That is huge. Is that it's
because that's straight away fluid category 5, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so dangerous. And well, we had an incident where there's a guy offering him at something like £35 to install them, and you're on Facebook, and it's just like there's no way you can fit a bum gun for £35 and have a brake tank protecting water supply. But fair play to Yorkshire Water, when they were made aware of it, they contacted the guy to explain the ramifications.
And do you think that was just lack of education from his perspective, or?
No, I think what I will say is advances in pipework technology, push fit, and the ease of joining pieces of pipe together, and people thinking I can join pieces of pipe together and it doesn't leak, I can do plumbing. And plumbing is one of the trades that's not mandatory licensed. So we know we've got licensing for gas and electric, but for plumbing there is no mandatory scheme.
So like a gas seat for the plumbing industry, if you like.
Yeah, so there is a voluntary scheme, and there's 7 approved person contractor schemes. But it's not mandatory, and that's part of the problem. Also, I think a big part of the problem is the erosion of the status of the plumber. So people go, you're just a plumber.
You hear it all the time. All the time.
Well, you're not just a plumber, you're a protector of public health. If you do plumbing right, then you're not going to contaminate the water supply. If you do it wrong, you run the risk of contaminating the water supply. And I think that's that's led to this massive open market of everybody doing plumbing.
Do you think there's a lot of there's an aspect of DIY in there as well? Or?
A huge element of DIY. You know, it's, well, if you look at bum guns as an example, if you look at on Amazon is a really good example. If you look at the bum guns that they sell and you look at how many reviews that they've had.
What's a bum gun for anybody who wants to?
So a douche spray. So you have it at the side of your toilet and you use it for cleaning your ass. So they're always been popular. They've become more popular. They became even more popular when we had toilet roll shortage right at the start of COVID. Yeah. And they were just getting put in everywhere. But you know, Amazon, if you look at them as an example, so the reviews on one of their bum guns, I think it had something like 25,000 reviews. Well, a bum gun, if you want to install one, before you even install it, you've got to apply to the water board for consent. So you would fill out a Regulation 5 document.
And how many people are doing that?
Yeah. I bet not a lot of people have heard of the Reg 5 document. So you apply for consent to the water board and you basically tell them how you're going to protect the water supply. You tell them what materials you're going to use. And a lot of products that are bought online and some products that are bought in shop, actually the products themselves don't comply with Regulation 4 of the water regulations, which is another topic really to look at. So that's a material that's in contact with the potable water supply. There's been a huge problem with cheap taps that leach nickel and other heavy metals into water supply. So
they're not RAS approved, they've been imported, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean I had that with a national kitchen supplier where they supplied some taps and they asked for the approval. You know, what is the approval? It can be RAS, it can be NSF, Kiwa, and there's others as well, but they couldn't provide anything. And in the end, they just provided me with a piece of paper that said, this tap complies with the water supply water fittings regulations of 1999, which it don't, you know, I comply with it when I install, you know. So we didn't fit that tap on that job.
So I've noticed that myself. I mean, you mentioned nickel. I won't mention the customer, but when a company I used to work for, we had to go out to a block of flats, and a woman she complained that she was being poisoned by the landlord for another reason completely. Yeah. But what the water board came out and actually scratch tested every joint for the solder to check the solder, and they also tested the taps and there was nickel content in them. Yeah. And we had to replace every tap, and also the contractor who had done it had wrongly used leaded solder, which caused another issue. So we had to replace the vast majority of the fittings in the job as well. But you mentioned something then about the fluid categories. You said about you know, the bum guns being fluid category 5. It's really easy for people out there to understand that if you've got something that's going to be touching fecal matter or blood or something like that, it's going to be of the highest fluid category risk. But what I've seen a lot of happening recently is people fitting dog washes outside, and that's also fluid category 5, isn't it? But people don't seem to associate it as the same level of risk.
Yeah, so the washing of animals is a fluid category 5. Yeah. There is lots of, I will call it like a gas meter box housing that I've seen typically, and then a bar mixer shower that's installed with an hose that then drops on the floor, because realistically, if you attach a retaining ring, you're not going to be able to wash the rug properly. And people think that a double check valve will cure the problem, but it's not. It's a fluid category 5. Will the water board enforce it? If it presents an issue, then the wood and the homeowner would be prosecuted. Yeah. You know, if there were a contamination incident. I wouldn't say that they actively go around inspecting domestic properties, but they will go to a water issue. With regards to dog washes, they will inspect dog grooming parlours. Yeah. If it's a registered business. And they are fluid category 5. They will enforce.
Which would mean a brake tank.
Yeah.
Even domestically, it would also require a brake tank. Yeah.
Yeah. You could fit a brake tank domestically, but you could, let's say for example, you could fit an anti-vandal shower head. Yeah. That's fixed on the wall that you can't move, and the dog would stand underneath.
But so you're going to get under the dog eyes. That's probably why.
Yeah. So you've got an air gap. There's no risk to the potable water supply. Yeah. So there is an option, you know, with it. They could use a DC device
like,
you know, which we've got here. Alan, if you want to show that to camera.
So that provides an air gap between the outlets of the shower and the animal, if you like, the hose.
Yeah. So, but we need 300 mil below that DC device before we get to the animal. That's what we need, really.
Which would then govern you on the height of your box.
Yeah. And
so what's that actually doing then, Paul?
Water would
come out of there, wouldn't it?
Yeah. There's an air gap inside it.
You can see that
So that's another option, but with a DC device you can't attach a trigger operated outlet on the end, because if you did, water would just overflow.
So that would need to be a valve that you'd turn on and then you'd wash down off that, and it'd be gravity fed from that point onwards.
Yeah. So there is options other than a brake tank for fluid category 5, but it depends on the application.
Because you can also see them on urinals and such.
Yeah. So this particular one's made by Nabic. And I know Thomas Dudley, they make one of these, and it is in Screwfix catalog. Screwfix sell a Thomas Dudley DC device.
What sort of price are you looking for?
The Screwfix one from Thomas Dudley, I think is about £30.
So 30 quid on top of your job to do it right, and I'm sure the customer would happily pay an extra 30 quid to know that peace of mind. They're not going to have the water board knocking on the door.
Yeah, or you're not going to contaminate the supply and make yourselves ill, you know, or God forbid anybody else.
Definitely.
You know.
So what bringing it back to the guys who are coming through here, I suppose that the next question is, these issues that we're likely to find and come across out in the field, who's the person who's going to be stood in the dock, for lack of a better phrase? Who's the person who's going to be facing the ramifications, and also what's the potential outcomes for these kind of breaches?
Yeah, so the person would be, if you're a registered contractor, let's say I'm a registered contractor and I install the plumbing wrong, then I would be responsible.
Yeah.
If it's an unregistered contractor, then it would be the building owner occupier who would be.
So the onus is on the occupier or building owner to prove that the person he got to perform the works was competent to do so.
Yes.
And if he can't prove that, the onus is on him.
Yeah.
Pretty clear.
But he would. So if he says, "Look, it'd be difficult for him to prove." Yeah. The only thing he could use to prove would be what's called a Regulation 6. Mm. So an approved plumbing contractor can issue a Regulation 6 document, and that is the business owner, occupier, manager. That's their get out of jail card. So if I go and do some work, I always issue a Reg 6 for my work, and it is the get out of jail card for them.
So what does that form comprise of? What does it do?
It basically tells the owner occupier, and the copy is also sent to the water board as well, what works I've done and how I've protected the potable water supply. Yeah. You know, that's what it does.
So then he's got something in black and white that says, I've done my own work, I've done my due diligence, I employed somebody who should know how to do the job properly, and I took his advice and his guidance, and therefore that he's not culpable, for lack of a better phrase.
And also the water board, when they get my certificate, they can review it and make sure that, yes, I have complied, I have interpreted the risk correctly and understood the water regulations and complied.
Spot on. So, I mean, I think at that point, the questions I've got written down was generally, you know, what kind of things do we come across, or the guys like to come across? What kind of issues do you see on a regular basis? Who's culpable for it? Who's responsible for it? So I've covered them. I mean, Alan, have you had any questions through on the?
No, they're just people asking about the bum gun. That's all. What that is, and you know where people would find it.
Yeah.
But
so there's a lot of bum guns in commercial premises, which I think I've shown you in one video, haven't I?
Yeah. Would you find that in like maybe bus depots or things like this, maybe? Or any public buildings? Would they have stuff like this?
I think you're probably more likely to find it in places that employ people, because they have to make provisions for certain religions to clean themselves and whatnot. So I think you are likely to come across them in commercial property, in commercial settings.
Yeah. So what's happened with them obviously is they're expensive to install because you've got to comply. Yeah. If you want a hot water supply with it, you've got to have an independent hot water supply that's off of a brake tank as well. Mm-hmm. And what typically happens is handy person just cuts a T into cold water supply. Yeah.
Do we find that most plumbers will know about water regs?
I think it's fair to say we probably
think
know the
people-
absolute basics.
I think people do know water eggs. But Alan, a really good example is the washing machines. You know, did you know that there were that many different fluid categories for a washing machine based on the risk? And I think that's the issue, is understanding the risk, and that then goes back to the course that you deliver. But I understand that course is set out from, you know, what's the body? The awarding body. Yeah, so it's.
I think
I don't blame the plumber for not knowing. You know, that's what I don't do. It's what you said. It's a one-day course.
It's controversial.
It is controversial. The trainings or the assessment or whatever it is, it's controversial. I think there needs to be more in it. That's what I think.
What I would say is that I went on the water rigs course.
Yeah.
Now the last time I did anything like that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I learned quite a lot on that water rigs course.
Yeah.
So I would say that a lot of plumbers, gas engineers could do that course and learn from that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think, as with all parts of our industry, there's varying levels of competence and knowledge. So you can get, and again, it boils down to attitude in a lot of cases. Some guys will go on a water regs course and they'll walk out once they've got the certificate, and they'll just, you know, like the old Homer Simpson men, where you put stuff in, the more you learn, the more you push out the other end.
Yeah.
And that they don't attribute that knowledge with any sort of value. So that's the first thing they're quite happy to forget about. Where I think that the point of this video is to sort of hit home about just how important the water regulation side is. I mean, you were telling me about where a pump was drawing chemicals into it.
Yeah. So on this particular job that I went to, just before we go on to that, so just regards to water regs.
Yeah.
So you do your course, and I'm an avid believer of, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
So I don't blame like the plumber for not knowing if they've done the course. If it'd be like you know, somebody, you're doing your gas course and then you're not servicing boilers, you're just throwing them in, installing them. But if you're not doing that repair knowledge, it's a bit more difficult to go and start fixing a boiler. So if you look at that from a water rigs point of view, if you have your course and then you don't use that knowledge for 12 months, 2 years, you forget it.
It goes.
It goes. So right. So going back to the pump job. So here's a question. I'll let if anybody can answer it. What size pump are you allowed to install on the potable water supply without consent?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a good question.
So I think that you should answer that question, Paul, because I know the answer to the question.
Okay. So without consent, the maximum is 12 litres a minute that you can.
What would be the reasoning? Why?
So if you drew more than 12 litres a minute, it can cause a hydraulic condition within what we call the network that can then cause backflow. So if you draw too much water from your pump, which is what happened in this job that I'm going to talk about, it'll cause an hydraulic condition which can lead to backflow and contamination of water supply.
Just on that point, Paul, because I deliver the course here, and there's various things that pop up in presentations that I look at and I think, I didn't know that, but I'm interested to learn why, and I'm sure you'll be able to answer. I thought I was always, until I started teaching it, I was always under the impression that you can only draw 12 litres or 0.2 litres per second if it's on a main, but it's also if it's pumping indirectly from the main via a tank.
Yeah.
So why is that?
So you can bottom out the main, you know, by drawing it off. But if your tank's not sized correctly, you could bottom out your tank and cause damage to your pump. But also, the water board want to know about waste. So if you're putting a big pump on and drawing loads of water, it needs to be used efficiently, because it's expensive to produce clean drinking water and have it distributed.
All right. So basically, what they're saying is, if your tank's not of the relevant capacity, you could dry it out, and then you'd be run the pump dry pretty much.
You can run pump dry, but also like I say, the big thing on that would be efficiency. You know, what water efficiency, what is it being used for, why are you using so much water? I've never had a job refused for a pump set that's gone in, you know, for a category 5 pump set, as an example, a non-domestic. They just want to know that it's sized correctly. So you've got things like Legionella, and you don't want it oversized, but you don't want it undersized.
So if our guys are going to site and they're coming across the fit a shower pump, for example, which are relatively common,
Yeah.
even if it's from a tank, they can only pump 12 litres per minute. But what if they need to pump more than that? What if the shower pump that they're installing is likely to draw more than that?
So they can apply for consent. So they can fill out a Reg 5.
A Reg 5 request?
Yeah, and apply for consent and let the water board know how much water they want to draw, and they will look at that.
And they've only got a specific amount of time left to respond in, is that right?
Yeah, and if top of my head, I think it's 14 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost certain it's 14 days, but Alan will check that and post it in comments if it's
Look in the comments.
What would be the normal water pressure coming into a property?
Yeah, so it varies, so like near where I live, some of properties, they're near a pumping station, so they get around about 6 bar, which is crazy.
Wow.
What would that mean flow rate then? How does flow rate relate to pressure?
Depends on pipe work, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on your size of your pipe work, but you won't want 6 bar going into a domestic property at too high a velocity, because you'll get pipe work erosion.
So would you be looking at like sort of pressure reducing valve?
Pressure reducing
Is
valve.
there a minimum that they have to provide?
So, so as I understand, some water boards will vary.
Yeah.
So I know it's slightly different in London, but it's typically 1 bar at 12 litres a minute.
Is that standard 1 bar?
I'm going to say working at 1 bar, because I've been at jobs where they're on a lead main, and they might have 1 bar standing, and you open the tap.
That's a big problem, isn't it? I mean, so this is another question actually from me. I don't know whether this has been asked on the forum, but so we see loads of properties where we're fitting boilers and guys are wrongly not checking the incoming flow rate. So most boilers specify a minimum flow rate for their appliance, and some people are fitting them to an inadequate water supply, and it might be that they've got enough pressure but not enough flow rates, because they might have a lead main that's kinked in the garden, or the supply pipe might be restricted. One way around that, which I always talk to guys about, is accumulators. Do you think accumulators are used enough in this country, or?
I haven't come across any accumulators. I know that they exist. I think in Yorkshire we've predominantly got a good network, and we've got a good reserve as well. I know that other places, and London's probably a good example, there's not a lot of reserve.
Is that because of overpopulation and whatnot in the area?
Well, no, if you just look at like the reservoirs that we've got in Yorkshire, that's a really good example. We've got an abundance of water, we get a lot of rain, and we can contain that water and control it, and then put it into network. But in London, you look there, you look at the pipework infrastructure. If they were to start increasing pressure, they'll probably have a lot more leaks.
Yeah.
And it's a major task.
We've got hi Alan, hi everyone, great show as always. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. So yeah, that's
so this pump job then. So yeah, because we digressed, didn't we? Right. So I went to, it's a commercial job that I went to, and the initial call was the insurance company wanted a backflow device fitting on the incoming cold water supply, and some of the taps, water didn't come out of them occasionally, and one of the taps, sometimes the water was frothy. So when I get to site, they'd said, we want, on the incoming cold water supply, we want an RPZ valve. So we've got a couple here, that's like a really small version that's only rated to 30 degrees Celsius. We've got a 4-inch one on a 3-inch RPZ valve here. But this one had a 42mm incoming supply, and you can't just willy-nilly fit an RPZ valve. You've got to identify the risk, you've got to apply for consent to the water board, and you've got to make sure it's suitable for the application. But this taps that didn't run, and this frothiness coming out of the tap, it led to like a full regs inspection of the site. And what we discovered right down at the bottom end of the factory, which were probably round about 100 metres, 150 metres, is the pipework had been extended and extended and extended, and it went down to 15 mil. And then this same supply then came back up the factory on what we would call a detergent line, and it was used for cleaning down the equipment. So the incoming supply came in, it went down, picked up a detergent, and then went back up the factory, and there were insufficient water pressure. So the engineering department decided, well, we'll fit a pump on main. down at point of use. So they fitted this pump that drew 100 litres a minute.
Wow.
And when that pump kicked in, it starved other taps when they were open of a water supply. So they would open up a tap, and if you can imagine getting to the end of a milkshake drink and you get that sucking noise, that's what were happening at the tap. Now, where they've got other risks and hoses attached, them hoses in effect become them straws, and you can draw whatever the risk is up the supply and into the drinking water supply.
So that's potentially contaminated your system water, that kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So this pump set that they fitted, it pressurised the line to 6 bar, and it went via what we call a dosatron. So this dosatron picks up a chemical out of an IBC and puts it into the potable water supply, and then sends it down into the factory for cleaning. And the single check valve had failed, so the line pressurised 6 bar, then the 6 bar pushed back through the single check valve and went to the nearest tap outlet, which were in a laboratory, and that's where we were getting frothy water. But the guy didn't realise it was detergent coming, and we didn't realise until we started doing the full investigation as to...
Was any of this water going to drinking potable water supplies?
It's all connected to the potable water supply.
So what kind of chemicals are you talking about?
Well, some of them is like acids, so they had like a sonic bath in there that contains an acid. You've got the detergent, so what's happening is there's a 6 bars going past the dosatron, it's picking up the chemical, it's then coming back, then going back, and all the time it's increasing in percentage.
So in that situation then, so we've identified that the engineering department, I'm assuming they weren't competent to carry out that work?
No.
So the property owner in that case would be responsible, yeah?
Yes.
So what was the ramifications? How did that end out, or do you not know?
Yeah, no, how it ended out was we installed a fluid catified brake tank,
right,
with an AB air gap, type AB air gap.
Right.
That's what we did. So we give them a reserve of water sufficient for doing the cleaning process.
But it wasn't connected to the main because it was positive.
No, we had a main supply going in to the top of the cistern with an AB air gap.
Yeah.
And then that brake tank then feeds, or cistern, then fed the booster set with a new check valve on it that pressurised the line and the detergent.
So you never left the old one?
No.
Okay, so the other job you told me about, which I found was fascinating, and I'm not sure whether this is the one you told me about previously, was a factory that it had animals in it, and then it contaminated the water supply.
Oh yeah, so this is it made the news, did this. So Yorkshire Water took the customer to court on this, and I think it goes back to around about 2018. So there was an incident in Thorn near Doncaster where 3,600 homes got contaminated with E. coli, and what had happened is the building had shut down. I think round about 2013, but then in 2017 it reopened, and reopened as an abattoir. But what should have happened at that point is a Reg 5 should have been submitted.
A change of use.
Change of use, yeah. Submit a Reg 5, change of use, it's going to be an abattoir, and then you tell the water board how you're going to protect the water supply, and they will review your plans and either agree or disagree and come and see and give you some advice. So there were no Reg 5 submitted, and the client paid this contractor thousands and thousands of pounds to install all this stainless steel pipework and brake tanks in this factory, which the judge said this is the best plumbing and pipework he has ever seen. It was just technically incorrect. And what they'd done is they'd fitted these fluid catified brake tanks, brake cisterns, but then they'd put a bypass on in case the pumps failed. But none of the pipework were lagged and labelled. No one knew that the bypass were in the open position, and in actual fact the bypass is an illegal cross connection. It should have never been fitted, but the valves were left in the open position, so when the pumps kicked in, the pressure was that great that it took the E. coli from the process area back down the main, and the double check valve had failed, so it then pumped E. coli into the potable water supply. So that was, it were around about a week. There were a do not drink notice and a boil water notice while the water board carry out an investigation, identify the source, and then treat the water supply so it's safe to return.
So was that chlorinating the whole water supply in every property? Yeah. Wow, that must have cost a fortune.
I think just in compensation, there's something like £108,000 were paid out to people, and then they've got the costs of the investigation, the costs of the prosecution, the costs of the workmen carrying out all the work, you know, probably realistically, we're probably around about £500,000.
And what would I'm assuming that company would have been fined or
Yeah, and so on this particular job there was 38 defects. 5 were the most serious, so there was the Reg 5 issue and then 4 brake tanks with bypasses, how I understand it. And that's what the water board prosecuted on. And the water board, they don't need to prove that you've definitely contaminated the water supply. They only need to prove that it's likely that you contaminated, that you're the source. So the maximum fine, and this is my gripe with this, is £1,000 per offence.
per breach?
Yeah, per breach. So their maximum fine were going to be £5,000 for contaminating.
It doesn't seem anywhere near enough, does it?
It's to me, it's not enough. I don't know how they would go about increasing them fines, because I think it's set by government. I think it's known as a category C fine, or a category C crown fine offence, or something like that. I can't remember the actual wording. But because the client had cooperated and said, you know, okay, look, we've had all this work done, we've got a problem, we're going to fix it, the judge gave him a discount.
Wow, what was they end up paying, do you know?
£2,700.
So we've got a question. What is an RPZ valve? How do we know it's working? Do they need checking? Do they need testing? Who tests them?
So you've got to be an accredited tester to test the RPZ valve. Anybody can install.
What is it?
It's a fluid category 4 backflow protection device.
It's a reduced pressure zone valve.
Yeah, and the RPZ stands for reduced pressure zone, and it's verifiable. So with calibrated test equipment, the tester can prove that the valve functions as intended.
And what kind of properties are you likely to see RPZ valve in?
You won't see it in a domestic property. No. It's a commercial product, and the application varies. So not every commercial premises is going to have an RPZ valve.
What sorts of premises generally do have them?
It varies based on risk, because what you could have is you could have a site that says we're going to put a brake tank in that gives us fluid category 5. So they wouldn't need an RPZ valve, you know, if the risk were a fluid category 4. So not everywhere.
So an RPZ valve is breaking the supply system with backflow. It wouldn't go back into the mains.
Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, is that what it would do?
I would call it, it's like a posh double check valve.
Right, okay.
You know, so you can prove that it works. If there is any backflow, the valve will shut down, and if there's any loss in pressure, the valve will open and dump out of the middle chamber the water to drain.
Which is like a blow-off valve.
Yeah, like a blow-off valve.
So Brendan has got a question. Why are plumbers not tested on a regular basis?
Should be.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, Alan, that goes down to there's no mandatory requirement. There's an erosion of the plumber's status. You know, you go to like America, Australia, Germany, tradesmen there are treated with respect.
Yeah.
Over here, there isn't that respect, and even amongst trade v trade, there isn't that respect.
Yeah.
And I think there should be. You know, I respect all trades, and probably the one that I respect them, I want to say, the one that really sticks out for me is painting and decorating. I hate painting and decorating, but that is a skill. It's not just slapping paint on a wall, it's all preparation. People think it's easy. It's not an easy job.
You're right in what you're saying though. I mean, people always say, you know, when people are talking about a high-end job, they tend to talk about doctors and lawyers and whatnot, and then when they refer into sort of the lower-end jobs, they do say you could just go and be a plumber. And it is quite demeaning to people who do the job, really, and it does show that sort of lack of appreciation for just how important the role of a plumber is in society, really.
Yeah, well, one of his customers is healthcare industry. Right at the start of COVID pandemic, we were straight into healthcare, and for a plumber, working in healthcare, that's like the pinnacle of a plumber's career. People are already ill in that hospital. If you cock it up, if your tools aren't clean, if you don't comply with regs and legislation, then you're putting the hospital at serious risk of contamination.
Because you've got people in immunodeficiency disease, people with reduced,
So you have to do absolutely everything by the book.
Yeah.
It's but people don't see that. It's if you saw in healthcare what you have to do to do plumbing, it's phenomenal. But that should happen. I mean, we do that on all those other clients that we go to anyway. We adopt that same policy and procedure because that is the standard that everyone really should be operating to. But
so they've got their own normative documents, haven't they, the NHS estates?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So that, because I know that, I mean, I served my time commercially for a company over in the Wirral in sort of Merseyside, and I remember quite vividly the amount of checks that, like, every thermostatic mixing valve within, sort of a point of use on every single sink in the hospital, apart from obviously your washing facilities and whatnot.
Healthcare, that is one of the main businesses where you must be a registered plumber.
Yeah.
So if you're not registered, you can't work in healthcare. You have to be a registered plumber.
Yeah.
And they look for like the WaterSafe logo, a WaterSafe membership. And obviously under that, you've got the 4 approved contract person schemes.
So the guys who come through and do the water regs course with us, then what they've got the option to do is then go on to a competent person scheme, like for example APHC, WEAPS, that kind of body, and then they can apply to WaterSafe. What are the benefits with WaterSafe?
So what I will say is you can't just have water regs and then apply for WaterSafe. You need an actual plumbing qualification.
Yeah.
That's what you need. So if you're not a plumber, water regs is essential, but it won't put you immediately onto the database. You need formal plumbing qualifications to go on there. So the benefit is, for me, it sets myself apart from the competition. Other contractors. I choose to be a WEAPS and WaterSafe plumber. It's good for me. It's good for my business. It instills confidence in the clients. My work is audited, so. I've just had a recent audit from Anglian Water where inspectors been out with me. Yorkshire Water, that's like my main sort of like water area that I work in. I'm in regular contact there with inspectors, see them on site, communicate on the phone, via email. There's an audit trail on my work, and going to a commercial business and offering me plumbing services, if I can back that up with an audit trail from the water company,
you can charge more. It's a better standard of tradesman, for lack of a better phrase. Because
it instills confidence in the client to give us the work. That's what it does. And I'm setting my stall out. This is where I want to be.
So as somebody who's coming through the centre, maybe on a route to do their air source, and they find themselves in having to do the water regs, what would your message be to them in terms of what value to take from that course?
I would say that doing the water regs course is just one stepping stone. That's like the start of like learning to drive. It's like passing your test. You've passed your driving test, but you learn when you're out on the patch. So I would say, pass your test and learn while you're out on patch. Look at what you've been taught in class and use that information before you lose that information. There's a great book from WaterSafe that's, I think it's about 20 quid or something like that, and it's just full of knowledge, examples, interpretations of the regulations.
We'll put the link I'll put the link for that book.
One of the questions we've got is, what about houses with unvented cylinders with 26 litres per minute at 3 bar? So I think they've sort of misunderstood the 12 litres a minute.
Okay.
So I don't know if you just want to explain that 12 litres a minute and
so
they're getting 26 litres a minute.
Yeah, so that's just their incoming cold water supply. So we were talking about if you were to pump from it. Yeah, so if you can imagine when the pump kicks in, there's a negative pressure at the back of that pump. And like the factory example that we've given, if you put too big a pump on without consent, so you don't know that the district supply can keep up with it, you could create back siphonage further down the line.
So on that point, in that example, if you had 26 litres a minute coming through from your main, you wouldn't be looking to pump that because you've got adequate pressure and flow rate there anyway. If anything, you'd probably be looking to reduce that.
Yeah.
So what we were talking about was if you've got a poor supply pressure or flow rate and you needed more. So for example, if you were fitting an appliance or a shower that needed, say, 18 litres a minute, and you only got 6 coming through the main, so you'd want to increase the flow rate through the main so that you could then service that appliance. In that case, because you want to try and draw more than 12 litres through, you'd have to put in a request to try and get to the water board.
So we've got a question, it's maybe not related really, but if you drain down a central heating system, where should the water go?
Okay, so I would say into a foul drain, not into a rainwater drain.
And what would be the reason, would you say, for that?
Well, you want to keep your rainwater eventually go back and get recycled. So you want to keep your foul separate. It's going to be full of contaminants, heavy metals. If they've used lead solder, it will be heavily contaminated with lead.
Also chemicals as well from maybe cleaning it out.
So that would be fluid category 5, wouldn't it? So that's why it goes into
foul. So domestic central heating water is fluid category 3.
Because it might have inhibitor in that kind
it's down to the volume of water.
Right.
So it'd be low volume, so it'd be rated at a fluid category 3. Commercially, it would go to a minimum of a fluid category 4. Right. So there was originally a rule that set at 45 kilowatts, so if the boiler output were greater than 45 kilowatt, you needed to have fluid category 4 protection. That 45 rule has disappeared. And what it's down to is a risk assessment of the water.
Right.
So if you've got, let's say you've got a system that's 60 kilowatt, but you don't use, it's chemical free, then they would probably allow you to use a double check valve.
So for example, if they use VDI 35 kind of thing.
Yeah. But if you're pumping loads of inhibitors in, then the water board will probably say we want fluid category 4 protection.
Right. Okay.
As a minimum.
Good question, that.
So you know that so normal inhibitors and stuff is alright to go into foul water. So I remember many years ago we used to use deposit remover on cleaning central heating systems when I used to work at British Gas, and then we was told we couldn't use it because we wasn't allowed to put it into the drains.
Okay.
So I don't know.
What about glycol? Can glycol go into it?
Don't know.
Because I'm saying that, I suppose it probably could. I mean, I know the course we deliver states that if it's because you get glycol anti-freeze in sprinkler systems.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they put that as a fluid category 4. I think
it is a fluid category 4.
Yeah. So that I've answered my own question.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
so another question we've got is water quantity. So is there any restrictions on a property of how much water you can use?
Yeah, so there is water efficiency in regards to number of showers, number of baths, number of people, and it'll give you a limit. So I'm sure it's been reduced. I'm almost certain it was something like 50 litres per person or something like that.
You work out 45 for hot water, don't you, per person?
Yeah, I'd have to double check Alan in book, but I know there's a limit per person. It's based on occupancy.
And this is the question of the 26 litres per minute for the cylinder.
Yeah.
So that's what the question were related to.
Yeah.
So they just wanted to know if there was like a limit of how much water you can use on a property.
They just want it to be used efficiently. That's what they want, because it's really expensive to produce wholesome water.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's just getting wasted, so let's say that you've got a 26 litre a minute shower. Yeah, you're going to have a phenomenal shower, but you're wasting a huge amount of water. With it.
The main areas of the water regs is waste, misuse, contamination, erroneous measurement, and what's the last one? There's 5 in total, isn't it?
Let's just run by what you said again.
Waste, misuse, contamination, erroneous measurement, and what's the last one?
You've got us here, haven't you? Stumped us with this.
Sorry, I shouldn't have asked this question.
5 main areas, Alan. Waste, misuse, contamination, erroneous measurement.
And I'll get that.
Come
That's
on.
gonna do me head.
I should know this.
It's alright, it's alright. Yeah, I wouldn't remember them off the top of my head anyway.
So we got you there then.
You've got me there on that.
Unknowingly.
I'm going to be like cursing myself. We're live, aren't we?
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, I always mess up with stuff like this, don't worry. So yeah, long and short, the point being, water regs is not just what we think it is. I think because there's not a massive amount of uptake in people wanting to go out and learn about water regs.
Undue consumption.
Undue consumption, that's the
I knew it would come to me.
I think it's really important that we take we take from the water regs course the things that we need to know and understand that there's actually a lot to it. I mean, we're really fortunate in this country where the water that we produce is actually better than bottled water. You know, there's less contaminants within it. That's not true of many even in the first world. It's not true of many countries where they produce water to the same standard as us, which goes back to what Paul's just said. We're quite fortunate in the country we live in. With that said, I mean, you can probably gauge from the conversation we've had today, I don't know how long we've been on, Alan, you'll probably tell me, but the wealth of knowledge that Paul's got is far superior to the vast majority of people who are going to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
So Paul Spencer's just commented, free fine plumbers if ever I saw them.
Cheers, Paul.
Who's the other one then? You're not on the video.
I want first picture though.
Right.
When it starts.
Thanks, Paul. But yeah, so I'd personally like to, and if there's no other questions, I'd really like to thank you for your time, Paul. It's been great you coming in. Thanks for bringing in the stuff that we can see.
Yeah, well, Alan, do you want to hold some of these up and ask questions, and we won't give the answer.
Well, if you put some of them up and just explain what they are really, because there won't be I don't think there'll be an opportunity to like.
Well, what they could do, Alan, is they could reply in your comments on video.
Yeah.
So I'll let you hold these up, Alan. You put these in front of the camera.
Just before Alan does that, we always say like and subscribe to this channel if you can. But on another note, Captain BackFlow, have a look on YouTube. Twitter as well. It's quite a good channel for learning stuff, you know, and seeing things like this. Obviously, Alan videos anything he possibly can, but go on.
So what is that, Alan? That's what we want to know.
What is it?
What do we call that? We'll call that the first product. This one.
Anybody know what this is? So if anybody knows now, we're live.
And we're looking for its family name. That's what we're looking for.
What else we got?
Well, I tell you what else, Alan, you can show them is, have you got that washing machine
isolation? I'm not picking this one up.
That washing machine isolation here. This is a great product, Alan, is this, to provide you with protection. So typically we come across this inline valve that's got a branch off for a washing machine connection, and there's no double check valve. Well, this is a product that's actually made by Altechnic. Take that back up, Alan, and screw that on. This is a quick solution to a problem of TCP tasting water. It's a double check valve, screw straight on, you've got your backflow protection, and you can put your hose on the end. As simple as that.
And what sort of price point are they, Paul?
I think that they are around about 17 quid or something like that.
With a piece of mind.
Which, if you decide, all right, I need to cut this T out, put a double check valve in, compression, you've got more joints, and that are going to leak, you're going to get a call back a little weep pump pipe or something like that.
What's this one then?
That's an RPZ valve, is that type BA device, that's its actual family name.
And why would you use one of these?
If the fluid category is 4.
You wouldn't use that in domestic though, would you know?
No.
So the setting that you took this out of, Paul, what was it?
So that was on a commercial dishwasher,
Right.
and it was on the hot supply.
Right.
So it's been replaced with one that's suitable for hot water, because this particular one is only rated to 30 degrees. So what had happened is the contractor who fitted them, he just looked for the cheapest product, found them, and
Never
fitted
checked
it. I then turn up to test, and it's non-compliant for the application. So
just for a bit of fun as well, guys, Paul's brought this. This is actually part of a check valve on a commercial setting. But if I just show you the force that you have to put on to open this valve head, it's actually...
Don't damage it, sir.
I'm not damaging the table. And I'm really giving that some. So you can imagine the force of water going through that 6-inch main. And that's a check valve. I nearly pulled me back out putting that on the table.
Do you test stuff like that, Paul?
yeah, so that actual check valve is a number 2 check valve from an RPZ valve.
Right.
That's what it is.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know because I've never done it, but
yeah.
There's big money involved in doing that sort of servicing of check valves RPZ valves each year, isn't there?
I wouldn't call it big money, you know, but you know, it's a
specialised.
It's a specialised job. It's you're at high risk sites, so you might be at a chemical plant,
Right.
you know, so it's not if you're faint-hearted and worry about shutting water off and doing repair and it not working, then
Probably not for you.
probably not for you, yeah, because production might go off, so you might be at a food factory You've got to make sure your insurance covers you as well. So if you get it wrong,
And they sue you.
well, the water's going off in it.
Yeah.
You know, so you need to be really, really competent and knowledgeable to be doing it. It's not a job for everybody.
And is there many guys out there doing this sort of stuff?
Yeah, there's loads of people that do it, you know. I mean, a really good example is yesterday I went to a job to do a test. So typically they're only once a year as well, so you can't rely on it as your sole source of income. And the valve had been tested, or they'd gone to have a test, but there were no number one isolation valve.
Yeah.
So the tester failed the valve and left without saying goodbye to the client, and why he'd failed it, he just wrote on his paperwork, failed, which then gets submitted to the water board. And the client rang for a second opinion, and I just said, I'll just bring number one isolation valve with me. And when I got there, the actual lagging in this plant room, it just slid down. There's like a foil lagging over the top of the foil face lagging. And I had to do just slide it up and the isolation valve there. So the client weren't happy with the original contractor, but were more than happy with myself. And then that's then led to other works at this. It's actually at a school. It's led to other works at the school, which we're going to do in 6-week holiday. There's what you call it, Alan. There were another product, Alan, that I'd shown you earlier. So that's another great product. So this is a double check valve, but it's in chrome. And what we use that for is if we've got a shower attachment that's in a domestic setting, so it's rated at a fluid category 3, and there is no retaining ring, and the shower hose drops below the spillover level of the bath but not near the toilet, or drops below the spillover level of the shower tray, you can actually screw that check valve onto the outlet. So you've got a double check valve that will give you fluid category 3 protection.
So we've got a really, really interesting comment here, which is water, and it's complicated. So this is what I'm thinking, is that being a plumber is more complicated than people think. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
You start off as like a basic plumber really,
yeah,
but then there's lots of other avenues that you could go into.
Yeah.
So like you said, healthcare,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
It's
I mean, if you know, healthcare's, you know, it's critical. Obviously, everything's done correctly there, but also so is food industry. So I work in food industry, and you can imagine, if you cock it up in food industry, you're contaminating a line, you're contaminating food product. It's serious. It's not like you've put a garden tap at somebody's house and you've got a leak. We're talking like significant sums of money where if you cock it up,
you're liable.
Please not swear, we are live.
That boils down to
cock it up swearing.
No, not where I come from.
Let's not keep saying it, just in case.
I'm being polite there.
So that takes us back to one of the questions I had for you earlier on, and you answered for me beforehand. So the level of fines to be implemented, we've discussed, and we've is it table 3 that the fines are?
It's either table 3 or class 3 fine, you know, that's set by the court, and it's set at £1,000. But as a business, you might go, all right, it's only £1,000 per offence.
Yeah.
But do you want your company on the national news?
But the question that I had, and this is what brought me to the question, is that's a maximum fine of £1,000 per breach for the organisation that owns, or the person who's culpable for the breach.
Yeah.
But if it's the organisation that's culpable and they've employed somebody who isn't necessarily competent to do the work but has done the work anyway, that doesn't mean that that company isn't then going to sue the contractor.
No, they could sue.
And their fines aren't going to be limited, I wouldn't have thought.
No, well, the solicitors' fees in themselves will be thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, Yorkshire Water on that case actually got awarded fees of £10,000 plus, and then the fine. But that fine money goes to the Crown. It don't go back to the water board. So it's actually expensive to prosecute somebody. But on that particular case, it's in the public interest.
Yeah.
You know, they couldn't just write it off.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just wish the fine were more. With regards to like licensing of plumbers, do I see it coming in? If there's a fatality, then I think it'll come on. You know, it'll come onto the scene. if you look back at Gas Safe and Corgi and all that, that started in something like Ronan Point. Alan, do you remember that? Ronan Point, something like 1968 when there was an explosion in a block of flats. And it actually didn't become mandatory until, I think it was 20 years later. There were a voluntary scheme, Corgi, but it didn't become mandatory. So I think with water, there'd have to be a serious incident for
it to become mandatory.
Yeah, the
you look at the likes of
to force it on.
Legionella is another similar thing after Barrow and Furnace, and similar instance like that. You know, that's when we've started really cracking down on Legionella, really.
Yeah, I mean that's another sort of like, you know, you get plumbers who go into Legionella work, and that's another really, really significant and important role.
Yeah.
You know, is Legionella and the control of Legionella and
What can people do to improve themselves, and you know, what's the next step from just being a normal plumber? What's the next step? How can you improve yourself? Where's the training? What do you need to do?
Yeah.
How do you get better?
So there's no additional training from water regs other than this mandatory course. So what I would say is get in touch with your local water company. So if you log on to, I think it's Water Regs UK, you can then find your local water company, and in there is the contact details for your regulations team, and make contact with your water regulations inspector and chat with them, arrange a meet. Some water companies have their own in-house training as well.
Don't use that, Dom, come here.
So you go on your water regulation training first.
Yeah.
And then you do this.
Make contacts, put yourself on their radar, let them know that you're interested, and they've probably got photographs that they can show you of incidents where you'll actually understand and learn from it. So I mean, I'd love to show you some of my stuff, but you know, because of where I work, it's you've got to have client confidentiality. You know, you can't really talk about that. You know, the client, it's not the client's fault. Out on the majority of jobs that I go to, it's down to I'm trying to think of the right word here on what it's down to.
You already said Cox, don't worry about it.
Yeah, so I think it's down to like an awareness. You know, if a commercial business wanted somebody to do gas, they'd be saying, where's your gas registration? Yeah. If they wanted somebody to do electrical work, they'd be saying, where's your electrical registration? Yeah. Legionella companies, I think it's the Legionella Control Association, LCA. I think that's the right one. But like plumbers, you know, what is the registration body? And when I go to these businesses, you know, I'll ask them that. I'll say, what is the registration body for plumbers? And they don't know. And it's because it's not mandatory. It's a voluntary scheme. If the government said, right, tomorrow everybody needs to be registered, there won't be enough plumbers that could go on the register, because there's people operating that are unqualified and incompetent, but there's people that are operating that are not qualified but competent, but they won't be able to go on the register
because they have to do water regs course, or they have to have a formal plumbing qualification.
Yeah, you know, and I know there's some really, really good guys out there that do phenomenal work and not registered.
The guy, my mentor, when I was 17, 18, a guy called Andy Crofton, I probably shouldn't have said his name, but to this day he's probably the best plumber I've ever worked with. Never qualified. Yeah. One of the best plumbers I've ever worked with. And yeah, he wasn't qualified, but he could tell you every regulation. He never had got you know what I mean?
So get in touch with your local water company. Alan, back to your question. Buy that water regs book. You haven't got one here, have you, Alan, to hand?
We can get one. We can put a link to it.
Definitely buy that. Don't read it all at once because you won't take it all in. But it's really good for some examples. Things like the washing machines. You'll learn that through experience. You don't learn it on an actual water regs course here. You'll learn that through experience. But if you contact your regs inspector, the last thing they want is an incident on their network. So they will gladly engage with you and help you, point you in the right direction. If you're unsure of anything, contact your regs inspector. Also, and they'll advise you.
It's worth mentioning as well, the whole point of this video is to sort of hit all water regs. It isn't just a prerequisite. It is a prerequisite, but it's not just a prerequisite. the guys out there who are in the industry working and want to be competent and want to grow the business, want to explore different avenues, come and do your water regs. It's inexpensive. We charge 185 plus VAT for water regs. It's a one-day course, and at the end of it, you get a certificate and a card that you can then use to, if you've got the relevant plumbing qualification, to apply to a competent person scheme. But even if you're looking at doing other things in the future, it is a prerequisite. But see the value in it more than anything else. See the value in doing a water regs course and actually understanding it and being able to put it into practice when you go out, because it does set people apart. If you go into someone's property and identify something that somebody else hasn't because they just weren't looking or they weren't bothered, that sets you apart, and you get, as you said before, repeat business. Just by being competent and just by showing a degree of knowledge that other people or your competitors may not have. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. How about you, Al? Anything to add?
Yeah, no. I'd just like to thank Paul for coming in.
Yeah, definitely.
Have a look on Twitter. You have YouTube as well, but you don't do a lot with that, do you?
No.
But he has got a YouTube channel as well, which I'll put a link below. But Twitter's the main thing. Follow him on Twitter. And thank you to everybody who's still watching and has been watching. If you do have any questions, please put them in comments below. After the video's finished, then we'll come back and we'll try and answer some of them questions as well. Anything else from you guys?
That's it. So
Thanks for watching,
guys.
Everybody.
Much appreciated.